And then after PayPal, then, I mean, to some degree, especially us in Silicon Valley, we kind of understand the internet. We know people. I mean, PayPal is obviously of a scale that, is noteworthy. But then SpaceX just seems really, like, how did you decide that I'm definitely going to do that? And then, like, what's the first thing that you do? Like, how do you even, like, go out? Like, I don't even know how to start trying to make a rocket company.
Well, neither did I, really. And in fact, the first 3 launches failed, so it's not as though it was like, spot on. It's like, did not hit the bullseye.
But even getting to the point that you're launching rockets, I don't even know how do you get there? And like, what did you do on, like, one, how did you decide, and then what did you do on day one? Like, who did you call, or did you write a plan? Did you start, I don't even know.
Yeah, actually, I mean, the origin of PayPal is, or rather, SpaceX is that I was trying to figure out why that we'd not sent any people to Mars. Because the obvious next step after Apollo was to send people to Mars. So, but what in fact happened was that we sent a few people to the moon, and then we didn't send anyone after that to the moon or Mars or anything. But if you'd asked people in 1969, what would 2013 look like? They would have said there'll be a base on the moon. We would have at least sent some people to Mars, and maybe there'd even be a base on Mars. There'd be like orbiting space hotels. And there'd be all this awesome stuff in space. And that's what people expected. And if you'd said, well, actually, the United States in 2013 will not be able to send anyone to orbit. But I'll tell you what will exist is that there'll be this device in your pocket that's like the size of smaller than a deck of cards that has access to all the world's information, and you can talk to anyone on planet Earth. And even if you're like in some remote village somewhere, as long as there's something called the internet, they wouldn't know what that means, of course. Then you'd be able to communicate to anyone instantly and have access to all of humanity's knowledge. I said, like, bullshit. There's no way that's going to be
Right.
And yet we all have that, and space is not happening. So I was trying to figure out, like, what was the deal here. And this was like 2001. It was just a friend of mine asked me, what am I going to do after PayPal? And I said, well, I've always been interested in space, but I don't think there's anything that an individual could do in space because it's the province of government, usually large government. But I'm curious as to when we're going to send someone to Mars. So I went to the NASA website, tried to figure out, like, where's the place that tells you that? And I couldn't find that. So I thought, well, like, either I'm like bad at looking at the website or they have a terrible website, because surely there must be a date.
That should be a big date, yeah.
Yeah, it should be like, this should be on the front page. And then I discovered actually that NASA had no plans to send people to Mars, or even really back to the moon. So this was really disappointing. I thought, well, maybe this is a question of national will. Like, do we need to get people excited about space again, and try to get NASA a bigger budget, and then we would send people to Mars. And so I started researching the area, becoming more familiar with space, reading lots of books, and came up with this idea to do something called Mars Oasis, which was to send a small greenhouse with seeds and dehydrated gel. Upon landing, you hydrate the gel. You have green plants on a red background, and the public responds to precedents and superlatives. So will be the first life on Mars, the furthest that life's ever traveled, and you'd have this money shot of green plants on a red background. So that seemed like it would get people pretty excited. So I started getting into this and trying to figure out, okay, well, can I afford to build the spacecraft? Because I had some money as a result of PayPal, but it had to fit within that budget. And I figured we had to do 2 missions, because if we only did one and it failed, then it might have like the opposite effect.
But you were willing to bet the farm, so to speak, on this.
Yeah. Well, I figured like I was willing to spend half the money that I got from PayPal. With no expectation of return.
Right.
Because I thought this was just something that was pretty important, and I'm like, it seemed like I could spend half the money made on PayPal on this, and there'd be, if that got NASA a bigger budget and resulted in us going to Mars, that would be a pretty good outcome.
And when your friends came or your family came up to you and said, look, there's nations that can't do this, you're a guy, but you have some resources, what did you say or do or think?
Well, so I had a lot of friends of mine try to talk me out of starting a rocket company because they thought it was crazy, and friend of mine made me watch a video of rockets blowing up. And there were just lots of people that thought it was a really crazy idea, and there was some people that had tried to start rocket companies, not succeeded, and they tried to talk me out of it. And but the thing is that the premise for talking me out of it was, well, we think you're going to lose the money that you invest. And I was like, well, that was my expectation anyway, so I don't really mind if I lose. I mean, I'd mind, but I mean, it's not like I was trying to figure out the rank-ordered best way to invest money, and on that basis, chose space.
Right.
It's not like that's. I thought, wow.
You weren't looking at like money market bonds, AAA bonds,
exactly.
rocket company.
Like
you weren't like
do real estate.
Yeah,
invest in shoemaking, anything. And space is highest ROI.
Exactly.
That is not what that wasn't the premise. I just thought that it was important that humanity expand beyond Earth, and we weren't doing that. So maybe there was something I could do to kind of spur that on. And then I was able to compress the costs of the spacecraft and everything down to a relatively manageable number, and I got stuck on the rocket. The US rockets were way too expensive. I ended up going to Russia, flew to Russia 3 times to negotiate purchase of an ICBM. I tried to buy 2 of the biggest ICBMs in the Russian fleet in 2001 and 2002. And I actually negotiated a price.
I'll just let that statement stand. I'm not even going to.
I mean, that's.
Actually, I have to. Like, who did you call? No, I mean,
you open the yellow pages.
Yeah,
go to
I'm in the market.
ICBMs.
I mean, how does this? I mean, I don't want to get too much in the way, but I am curious. This is one particular thing. You decided at some point you need to buy an ICBM.
Yeah. Well, actually, at first I tried to buy just a normal launch vehicle that they used to launch satellites. But those were too expensive.
I see. I see.
The Boeing Delta II would have cost $65 million each, and so 2 would have been 130, and then I was like, whoa, okay, that breaks my budget right there.
Yeah.
And I tried to negotiate with them, and that was not.
How much does an ICBM go for? I'm curious, what's the market rate for one of those?
Well,
this was right after the fall. It might have gone up.
Yeah, it's gone up a lot since then. But in 2001, it would have been about $10 million each so 2 would have been 20, and then I thought I could get the rest of the mission down to also around 10 per. So we'd have a dual mission with like 2 identical launches, 2 identical spacecraft, and for like roughly $40 million, and so I thought that I can do that.
But you must have had some rocket scientists advising you at this point. I mean, this sounds like you were serious. I mean, you were.
Yeah, engaged a bunch of sort of consultants. And kind of started to get familiar with the space industry. But then after the 3rd trip to Russia, I came to realize that I was actually wrong about that on my first premise, that there was a lack of will. In fact, I think that there's a tremendous amount of will in the United States for space exploration. Because the United States is essentially a nation of explorers. I mean, it's a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. So of course, it was quite silly of me to think that people lack motivation. But what people don't want to think is that, sending people to Mars is going to be so expensive that they'll have to give up like healthcare or something. They're not going to do that. So it's got to be, it's got to be that going to Mars is not going to cause some meaningful drop in their standard of living. So if it's like maybe 0.25% or 0.5% of GDP, something like that is palatable. Anyway, so I thought, it's not really going to maybe matter that much if I do this mission, because what really matters is having a way. So I was wrong. I thought there wasn't enough will, but there actually was plenty of will if people thought there was a way. So then I said, I need to work on the way. How hard is it really to make a rocket? Historically, all rockets have been expensive. So therefore, in the future, all rockets will be expensive. But actually, that's not true. If you say, what is a rocket made of? And say, it's made of aluminum, titanium, some copper, carbon fiber, if you want to go that direction. And you can break down and say, what is the raw material cost of all these components? And if you have them stacked on the floor and could wave a magic wand, so that the cost of rearranging the atoms was 0, then what would the cost of the rocket be?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, okay, it's really small. It's like, 2% of what a rocket
Right,
costs.
right.
So clearly, be in how the atoms are arranged.
Right.
The other, so you got to figure out sort of, okay, how can we get the atoms in the right shape much more efficiently?
Yeah.
And so I had a series of meetings on Saturdays with people that were some of whom were still working at the big aerospace companies, just to try to figure out, is there some catch here that I'm not appreciating? And I couldn't figure out. There didn't seem to be any catch, so started SpaceX.
And you ended up building. I mean, you had some failures, but obviously some huge
Yeah.
successes. What was the cost that you were able to build this rocket for relative to what they were being built for before?
So let's see. For the Falcon 1, which is the first rocket we built, and the first 3 flights did not make it. In fact, yeah, I mean, we got sort of progressively further, but like the first rocket came and landed maybe a couple hundred yards away from the launch site, and tiny fragments. Anyway, that rocket ended up costing around $6 million.
Wow.
Compared to other rockets in that class, which were about, say, $25 million.
Wow, so significant.
Yeah, like a quarter.
Wow, wow.
But there's an even better step beyond that, which is to make rockets reusable.
Yeah.
So right now, that is around what our comparison price is, excluding the refurbished ICBMs.
Yeah.
So if you say building a rocket from new, how does the SpaceX rocket compare to a rocket from Boeing or Lockheed? It's about a quarter of the price. However, if we make it reusable, then it can be 2 orders of magnitude cheaper.
2 orders of magnitude cheaper, well, 1/100th the price.
That's right.
I mean, and I've
For
seen
you.
for only today Memorial Day sale. And I've seen some. I mean, y'all are doing like these vertical landings.
Yeah.
Like literally out of like the
Yeah.
1950s like sci-fi movies.
Yep.
And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, the rocket needs to come back and land at the launch site, and then reload propellant, take off again, like an airplane.
And how far do you think we are
in its reusability, yeah.
from that? Like when do you think, like, your best guess when we'll actually see that happening?
I'm hopeful we can do it next year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's we got some ambitious stuff at Khan Academy for the next year too, so we can compare. We're redesigning the site,
Right. We've been working on it for a long time. I should say, SpaceX has been around for 11 years, and thus far we have not recovered any rockets. We've recovered the spacecraft from orbit, so that was great. But none of our attempts to recover the rocket stages have been successful. The rocket stages have always blown up basically on reentry.
Yeah.
Now we think we've figured out why that was the case, and it's a tricky thing because Earth's gravity is really quite strong, and with an advanced rocket, you can do maybe 2 to 3% of your liftoff mass to orbit, typically, and then reusability subtracts 2 to 3%.
Because you have to.
Yeah. So then you go like nothing to orbit or negative.
Right.
And that's obviously not helpful. So the trick is to try to shift that from, say, 2 to 3% in an expendable configuration, to make the rocket mass efficiency, engine efficiency, and so forth so much better that it moves to around maybe 3.5 to 4% in expendable configuration, and then try to get clever about the reusability elements and try to drop that to around the 1.5 to 2% level, so you have a net payload to orbit of about 2%.
But you're doing it at 2 orders of magnitude cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. Because our Falcon 9 rocket costs about $60 million, but the propellant cost, which is mostly oxygen, that's 2/3 oxygen, 1/3 fuel, is only about $200,000.
Wow.
And it's much like a 747. It costs about as much to refuel our rocket as it does to refuel 747. Within. Pretty close, essentially.
So what I mean, assuming y'all are successful and y'all have proven yourself to be successful on kind of these audacious things in the past, I mean, what happens? I mean, that seems like it's I mean, what happens in the next 5, 10 years in the space industry if y'all are successful there? I mean, do we get to Mars? Do we have kind of market forces, commercialization of space starting to happen?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, the first step is that we need to earn enough money to keep going as a company. So we have to make sure that we're launching satellites, commercial satellites like broadcast communications, mapping, and the government satellites that do scientific missions, Earth-based or space-based missions, GPS satellites, that kind of thing. And then also servicing the space station, transferring cargo to and from the space station, which we've done a few times, and then taking people to and from the space station. So we've got to service the sort of needs, Earth-based needs to launch satellites, and that pays the bills.
Yeah.
But in doing that, keep improving the technology to the point where we can make full reusability work, and we have sufficient scale and sophistication to be able to take people to Mars.
Wow. And so you think this is going to be a reality in what's your best guess of when we're going to have someone on Mars?
I think probably about 12 years.
12, that's
Give or
not,
take 2
and you think it'll be a round trip? It'll be,
Yeah.
it won't just be some type of permanent colony on Mars. Yeah.
I think it's probably a round trip.
Wow. so for
I mean, it's not for sure.
I could talk about this for, I mean, the people know
so the aspiration will be a round trip.
yeah. No, this is mind blowing.